I got off the longest flight ever. I'm so dehydrated. Are you guys so dehydrated? I am so dehydrated, so I need my water here. Before I talk about me, I want to ask you a couple questions. How many of you are parents here? Raise your hand. Okay, nearly everybody. How many of you have ever done a digital detox? Anybody? Okay, how many of you own a smartphone? Oh, perfect. Okay, you're my perfect audience. I'm so glad. So I was at another conference recently where they put these hashtags next to my name. Tech, journalism, those I've heard of, digital anxiety research. I am so glad that hashtag exists. I think it looks like a German word. I bet there actually is a German word for that, but for me, I am a technologist, I'm a podcaster, and I help people understand how tech is changing their lives. I'm also a media entrepreneur, which is a new one for me. This is my new headshot. I think I look like I just published a novel about ill-fated World War II lovers, because this is really how I think of myself. Those are my two chipmunks, who I left behind in Brooklyn, New York. And I started out as a hardcore journalist with the BBC, with Reuters. I mean, look at the size of that computer monitor. I have been a journalist for a long time. But about 5 years ago, I found my calling, podcasts. I fell in love with podcasts because they deliver so much more than facts. They deliver emotion, they deliver intimacy. Any podcast listeners here? Yes, you know what it's like. You take me jogging with you. We go to the grocery store, we do our dishes. It's a very unusual relationship that can be built between a journalist and their audience. My first podcast was called Note to Self. It's a tech show, but really it's about being human. Rather than talk about valuations or new products, I tell stories and I do research into how apps and phones and social platforms are changing the way that we think, the things that we believe, the way that our brains work, because it really does feel like every day we are experimenting on ourselves. And so I want to tell you about 3 investigations I did with my listeners and play some audio. So think of this as a live podcast. If you want to close your eyes, those of you who are jet lagged, you're welcome. The first project was 4 years ago, and we called it Bored and Brilliant, and it was based on a problem that I was having, which was that I was struggling to come up with creative and weird ideas that I used to, and I wondered if it was because my habits had changed. All the little boring moments in my day when I used to let my mind wander, waiting in line for coffee on the subway, now I looked at my phone constantly. And I wondered, were there repercussions? Like, what was going on in my brain when I used to just let my mind wander, when I used to get bored? I spoke to neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists who told me that actually, when we get bored and ignite a very particular neural network in our brain called the default mode. And this is actually where our most original thinking and creative problem solving can happen. This is when we do something called autobiographical planning. We tell ourselves the story of our life. We look back at the highs and lows, and then we figure out where we're going to go. And here's how boredom researcher, yes, there is such a thing, Dr. Sandy Mann describes it.
Once you start daydreaming and allow your mind to really wander, you start thinking a little bit beyond the conscious, a little bit into the subconscious, which allows sort of different connections to take place. It's really awesome, actually.
But you can't tap this awesome brain power if you're constantly tapping your phone. So I asked my audience, would you be interested in maybe changing your daily habits just for a week with me to see if we got more boredom into our lives, if we let our minds wander a little bit more, see what would happen? And I thought maybe a couple hundred people would sign up for this project. But within 48 hours, 20,000 people signed up. I was not a special snowflake. So the first thing that we did is we asked them to download some apps. Does this seem perverse? Yes. But everybody loves self-quantification, right? So what we wanted them to do is see how much time they were spending on their phones and how many pickups they had every day. Just that quick check that you do. And collectively, we discovered that before our week of challenges, we were averaging just over 2 hours a day on our phones and checking our phones around 60 times. And keep in mind, those numbers from our self-selecting group are actually considered low. It's been estimated that the average American, I'll just speak for Americans, checks their phone around 150 times a day. I want to play you a clip from a listener named Tina about what she discovered.
So far, I've been spending between 150 and 200 minutes on my phone per day, and I've been picking up my phone 70 to 100 times per day. And it's really concerning because that's so much time that I could have spent doing something more productive, more creative, more towards myself. And I sort of knew that I was spending too much time on my phone. I was just always so inclined to reach for it whenever there was like a dull moment, instead of just sort of staring blankly or sort of just thinking about things.
So how did we get Tina to think more about things? Well, every day for 1 week, Tina and all the other participants got a newsletter and a corresponding podcast with a challenge, a little tiny behavior tweak to try just for the day to see what happened. My favorite was day 3. This assignment was called Delete That App. Take the app off your phone that is driving you the craziest. You know the one. Your thumb keeps reaching for it, or if you're over 40, your index finger. We asked people to take that app that was driving them crazy, take it off, just do it. And I want to play you what one guy's experience was.
This is Liam in Los Angeles, and I deleted Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Snapchat, and Vine from my phone in one fell swoop. And it was kind of an embarrassingly emotional experience at first. It felt weirdly lonely to look at that lock screen with no new notifications on it, but I really like deciding for myself when to think about or access my social networks, not giving my phone the power to decide that for me. So thank you.
Okay, so Liam is obviously an overachiever, but I want to take a moment to make clear, our message was not technology is bad. That was not the message. Technology is amazing, but we have to use it more purposefully, and we have to understand some of the effects that it is having on us. At the end of that week, 90% of our participants cut down on their minutes. This project is cited in numerous academic and scientific papers, despite our very unscientific data. But you know what I love more than the numbers are the stories. One guy told me, I feel like I am waking up from a mental hibernation. I think a little neuroscience, a little personal data, it gave people permission to do something as simple as think and reflect. Okay, so for the next project, instead of tackling how we use our devices, I wanted to tackle all the information coming out of our devices, and a problem that many listeners had mentioned to me: information overload. Your CEOs, I'm guessing that is something you have to deal with all the time. Well, 40,000 people signed up for InfoMagical, super silly name, for a week, again, of experiments to see if we could find focus and actually do something with all the information that we consume all day long. Because those who suffer from information overload, I'll speak for myself, we are gluttonous. We want to click every link. We want to read every newsletter. We want to find every post. But as 80% of those we surveyed told us, we also feel drained and like we can't process all that information. I spoke to neuroscientist Dr. Daniel Levitin, who told me that's because we have physiological limitations. Oh, no, I don't want to set him up yet. I want to tell you why people told us, then I'll set him up. Okay, I obviously spaced out, didn't I? All right, so I don't want to miss something that will inspire me is what they told me. I feel a need to always stay up to date so I'm not embarrassed if it comes up in conversation. I am somehow deeply convinced that I should be able to accomplish more in a day than I would ever expect of someone else. Again, CEOs, I'm guessing the last one resonates with you. FOMO is real. I want all of these things too. But as I said, I spoke to a neuroscientist, Dr. Daniel Levitin, who said, this is physically impossible.
Every time you shift your attention from one thing to another, the brain has to engage a neurochemical switch that uses up nutrients in the brain to accomplish that. So if you're attempting to multitask, doing 4 or 5 things at once, you're not actually doing 4 or 5 things at once because the brain doesn't work that way. Instead, you're rapidly shifting from one thing to the next, depleting neural resources as you go.
So switch. You're using glucose.
Exactly right. And we have a limited supply of that stuff.
So you burn through your glucose, and that is why, I'll just speak for myself here, I put my kids to bed and I find myself lying on the floor, scrolling on Pinterest, looking at couches, doing something incredibly mindfully. So what did we ask people to do? To try and reset our information expectations, we asked our listeners to choose an information goal. And for 1 week, only consume information that gets you closer to that goal. So psychologists actually call this sticking to a schema. Sticking to a schema has been proven to improve your memory. Twitter, it has no schema. That's why you remember nothing that you read on Twitter. Also, custom emojis. Not only were they super fun to make, but also having a visual reminder is what can help people stay on task. At the end of that week, 71% of our participants reported feeling less overloaded, but really what excited me was some of them describing the strange sort of magic that they felt. One woman decided to focus on French for the week. She only cooked French recipes, she only watched French YouTube, she left me voice memos in French every single day. So God bless her, right? Another guy, on a more serious note, got in touch with his estranged father. Someone else finally understood the new tax code. Whatever floats your boat, right? But the point is that by choosing to take in information more purposefully, we can synthesize it and put it to work and do things that actually have meaning and value to us. All right, for Project 3, things took a more urgent and serious turn. The final project was called the Privacy Paradox. It was a week of daily challenges to help people understand where their personal data goes and maybe even take some steps to reclaim it. Because here is the paradox. Consumers care very much about their privacy, but they don't always act on that conviction, and they feel conflicted, as I think this listener puts it perfectly.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I live in Brooklyn. And I use Facebook all the time, specifically Facebook Messenger. I have downloaded the app and used it and then deleted it and gotten totally rid of it and then downloaded it again and then deleted it again. I've done this about 3 times. And it's mostly because I have a level of unease about how much data I am giving Facebook for free.
50,000 people signed up to try and make a few changes and resolve this dilemma. Keep in mind, this was before the Cambridge Analytica scandal, but I think more and more consumers now understand that they pay the price for free apps and services with their personal information. And therefore, they need to ask, where is this information going? Who is holding onto it, and what are they doing with it to potentially influence us beyond just our shopping habits? On day 1, we helped people dig into their phone's most gruesome settings. You would be surprised how few people know how to do this. We walked them through exactly how to get in there, and here's what one listener found.
I think the best thing I discovered was that my flashlight app, which presumably exists just to turn on and off the light on the back of my camera, actually had access to my microphone and my contacts and my location. So that app got the X.
But my favorite day was day 5. Does anyone recognize this man? Shout it out. It's Sir Tim! It's Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web. The web is turning 30 years old on Tuesday, by the way. Happy birthday, web. I went to visit his lab at MIT, where he is working on new technology called Solid. So Solid would let us keep our information in what he calls personal online data stores, or pods. Like, instead of you logging into Facebook, Facebook would log into you, and you would only hand over the information that you felt comfortable sharing. Here's how Sir Tim describes it.
I own all my data. I can have direct access to it. Anything that you, as a company, as a bank or a supermarket, anything you keep about me, I can access at any point. And programs that I run can access it across the internet. If it's personal data, I can fix it. If they spelled my name wrong or they've got my blood type wrong, then I can fix it.
Solid is still in development, so I figured the next best thing was to ask our listeners to write their own terms of service. And no, they're not like 48 pages long. We made it super simple by creating fill-in-the-blank forms, kind of like Mad Libs. Any Gen Xers out there, you might know Mad Libs. Here's what they looked like. People posted them on Twitter, they printed them out and put them next to their computers to remind themselves that our digital privacy does matter. Europe is experimenting with the GDPR, but the United States has shockingly little data privacy legislation. At the end of our project, 70% wanted to push for better protection of our digital civil rights. Okay, so that was the end of Project 3, the end of my trilogy. But meanwhile, that first project, Bored and Brilliant, it kind of took on a life of its own. I did a TED Talk in Vancouver 2 years ago. I wrote a book, and I went on a book tour across the United States. And I thought you might enjoy seeing some of the selfies I took with people. I asked them to get bored with me, which was kind of fun. And having a book tour is like having your own personal focus group. The top 3 things that came up over and over again were parents battling with their kids over screen time, employees dealing with workplace burnouts and bosses not knowing how to handle it, and young adults dealing with depression and anxiety. I've also met dozens of teachers who are using the book in their classrooms because there's not a lot of curriculum about this stuff. And they agree, on or off is not the answer. Tech is amazing, but we need to teach why we sometimes behave the way that we do with our technology, that the business models are dependent on us giving as much of our data and time with our eyeballs as possible. And I find this fascinating. Teachers tell me that they are now having to teach things in their classrooms that they have never had to teach before. Things like eye contact, listening, conversation, and yes, thinking about something after you read or talk about it. Just a few years ago, Bored and Brilliant might have seemed a little strange, potentially alarmist, but nearly every day now the headlines make clear that Silicon Valley's utopian belief that technology is always for good is being tested from a consumer, a civic, and a financial perspective. On a macro level, we've seen that elections and economies are at stake. On a micro level, our mental health. Will there be new regulation, design standards, or other responsibilities taken by the tech companies? We've seen a few small ones. Apple, for example, in the latest iOS update, you will find that immediately delivered to you is a screen time tracker, like those little indie ones that we used 4 years ago, but this one's built in. Now, why? Why is it there? Well, because there are activist shareholders on that board who have children, who asked for it to be put in there. Also because they pointed out, showing that you care about the well-being of your customers is good for business, right? But I don't know. More tech so that we can deal better with our tech and spend less time on our tech? I'm not sure that's the answer. I do think, though, that we need to find language for this crossover between technology and our well-being that more and more people are talking about. We are at a crucial moment. Any CMOs out there who can think of how we can brand this, please find me tonight. I will be the person with the Cabernet in the corner. This moment is also what prompted my executive producer and I to quit our jobs and start our own media company. We call ourselves, as you heard, Stable Genius Productions. That is actually a reference to a Donald Trumpism. Our mission is to help people navigate personal and global change. And our first grant came from these folks. Civil Media's plan is to launch a cryptocurrency as part of a token-curated registry to facilitate a new governance model and weed out fake news. What the heck did I just say? Yeah, I didn't understand it either, so we decided to do a podcast about it. The podcast is called Zigzag. On the first season, we document what it's like for 2 moms to quit their stable public radio jobs and become media entrepreneurs who do not want to take VC money. Started by making things hard for ourselves. And we also needed to explain blockchain. If any of you have ever tried, this is not an easy thing. It also is extremely boring very quickly, and not in the good way either. So I'm just going to play you a short clip of how we tried to liven it up a little bit.
Blockchain is complicated. There is no denying it. But we can do better. Breaking down big ideas is what we do. So, you ready? Here are 3 things that you need to know about blockchain. We're going to build on them, but let's just start with these 3 things. And actually, let's add some music to get you in the right mood. Oh, I like that guitar. All right, this is good. Okay, here we go. Number 1, something you need to know about blockchain. Blockchain is related to something you probably have heard of, Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is blockchain's baby. Bitcoin is blockchain's baby.
Right, cool, okay, good. So, got number 1, ready for number 2.
It goes on like that. Civil's coin is actually launching tomorrow, if you're curious. I'm not sure this blockchain thing is ready to be consumer facing, but I don't know if you saw the article last week that Facebook, Signal, Telegram are all launching their own digital coins as well this year. So it's an interesting time to be in the space. And apparently blockchain and women entrepreneurship is a good angle because we've gotten some good press. We are breaking out beyond blockchain now, and we are building our community, our podcast community, as a place where we can rethink what success looks like, where we want to go beyond likes and shares and 100x returns, because I think more and more people want to put the individual and collective good in their products and their work. We're still figuring out how to do this, but I want to leave you with 3 parting thoughts. The first is this: 50% of the world's population is expected to own a smartphone by 2021. And we need to empower these consumers. So people like me need to do a better job, hopefully with your help, explaining how the current culture in Silicon Valley trickles down into our social media feeds and the very human decisions that go into making these tools. Number 2, if you are thinking that my perspective comes from a place of privilege, you are absolutely right. Nearly half the world's population is not online, and they need to be connected to do more than post on Instagram. We need to get closer to universal access, but we also need to do so ethically. I just came back from a gathering in Silicon Valley that was put on by the Omidyar Foundation, which is trying to gather sort of a cross-sector, diverse, solutions-oriented movement group with designers and technologists and VCs. I hope and I think 2019 will be the year that you see this movement get more organized. And the final thing is just to say thank you to my listeners, because as you saw, they believed in me enough to change their little daily habits, very personal things, and then report back on things that are very hard to quantify: creativity, focus, autonomy. And now I really want to try and see how we can increase trust and empathy, because those are 2, of course, crucial things that make a society function. Because as you heard already this morning, algorithms and machines are going to be making so many more decisions for us every single day. But we still need to take care of each other and find meaning in our lives. And we may not be able to quantify those things. I know that breaks people's heart in Silicon Valley, but there may not be metrics or ROI. And I think that's okay. Because as you just heard, the stories that we tell to ourselves and the stories we tell each other matter just as much. Sometimes you cannot measure impact, but you can feel it. Thank you so much. If you were bored, I'm so glad.